Throughout the course, I've mentioned tuples a few times. In this lecture, we're going to take a closer look at them. A tuple is basically a read-only list. We can use it to contain a sequence of objects, but we cannot modify this sequence. We cannot add a new object to it, we cannot remove an existing object, and we cannot modify an existing object. So let's start by defining a tuple called point. Instead of square brackets, we use parentheses to define a tuple. So here we add a couple of numbers here, a point with x and y values. We can also exclude parentheses, and Python will see this as a tuple. Let me show you. So let's print type of point and run this program so you can see it's a class of tuple. Now, if you have one item, you should add a trailing comma. Otherwise, Python thinks you're defining an integer. So if we run this code, you can see point is an integer, but if we add a trailing comma here, Python treats this as a tuple. Also, if you want to define an empty tuple, you should use empty parentheses. So let's run this one more time. You can see point is still a tuple. Now, similar to lists, we can concatenate two tuples. So here we have one tuple, we can concatenate it with another tuple. Let's print the result. So now we have this tuple with numbers 1 to 4. We can also use the multiplication operator to repeat a tuple. So now when we run this code, we have a tuple with 1, 2, 1, 2, and 1, 2. These are different ways to create a tuple. We can also convert a list to a tuple. So let's say we have a list of two numbers. To convert this list to a tuple, we call the tuple function. As you can see, this function takes an iterable, so we can pass any iterables here, and this function will return a tuple. So here's one example. Let's print point. Now we have a tuple of two numbers, or we can pass a string like hello world, and because strings are iterable, now we get a tuple of 11 strings. Now let me revert this back to a simple tuple. Similar to lists, we can access individual items using an index. So we can get the first item, which is 1, or we can get a range of items like items from index 0 to index 2. This returns another tuple with only those objects. We can also unpack these tuples. So we can define 3 variables like x, y, and z and set it to point. Similar to lists, we can use the in operator to check for the existence of an item. So if 10 is in point, then we print exists. But as I told you, these tuples are immutable. We cannot mutate them. We cannot change them. So if I try to modify point of 0 and set it to a new number, look, we immediately get this red underline. And if we run the code, we get this type error. Tuple object does not support item assignment. For this very reason, unlike lists, we don't have methods to add a new object or remove an existing object. So you might ask, where in the real world we use tuples? Here's a basic rule of thumb. Let's say you're dealing with a sequence of objects, and you want to make sure that you don't accidentally modify this sequence, you don't accidentally add a new object to it or remove an existing object. So instead of a list, you can use a tuple to prevent these accidental errors.